I've received some reports from students who took the January LSAT suggesting that LSAC has made logical reasoning significantly harder, likely in anticipation of their removal of the logic games section after the June LSAT. For those who aren't aware, LSAC is removing the logic games section from the LSAT after June and replacing it with a second scored logical reasoning section, beginning with the August LSAT this year. Now, of course, 2 scored logical reasonings, 1 scored reading comp, and no games leaves the question, will LSAC change the logical reasoning section? And in fact, are they already beginning to do this? Are they going to incorporate more, say, formal logic, more abstract reasoning into the logical reasoning section to replace the formal logic that will no longer appear on the exam since they are removing the logic games section? In my view, this is of course ridiculous. The logical reasoning section will remain pretty much the same as it has been. There will be no significant or radical alterations to the logical reasoning section. The whole reason LSAC feels comfortable removing the logic games section and replacing it with that second scored logical reasoning section is because their data shows that there is no statistically significant difference in those 2 versions of the LSAT based on the available data they have. If they change the logical reasoning section to incorporate significantly more formal logic and to shift the ratios of different LSAT question types, that will render that old data useless, and they will then be in a brave new world where their old data is no longer relevant. They don't really know where they're going with this, and of course, the LSAT fails to be a reliable and predictable indicator of first-year law school grades that law schools can count on. As LSAC has significantly changed the format of the LSAT over the years, they have done rigorous testing prior to each change in order to ensure that the older versions of the LSAT will be comparable to newer versions of the LSAT, so that a student with, say, a 170 LSAT score on the old 4-section LSAT or the LSAT Flex and the new 3-section scored LSAT are all comparable scores, so a law school does not need to be concerned about students with one version of the LSAT versus another version of the LSAT. For those who are not aware, the LSAT used to have 5 sections prior to the pandemic, 4 of which were scored, 2 logical reasonings, 1 logic games, 1 reading comp, and of course, 1 unscored experimental section. Then, with the beginning of the pandemic, LSAC switched the format of the LSAT to become the LSAT Flex, with only 3 scored sections, no experimental section at all, which of course they could not do forever because at some point they did need to be able to test out new LSAT sections, so they eventually added in a 4th unscored experimental section, which is where we are currently now. However, LSAC needed to remove the logic games section due to a lawsuit with a blind test taker named Angelo Bino, who contended that he was at an unfair disadvantage because he couldn't benefit from diagramming logic games the way other LSAT test takers can. LSAC settled the lawsuit and agreed to develop a new version of the test without the logic games section. They decided to simply remove the logic games section entirely. And so now we're in this transitional period where April and June will be the last 2 administrations with the logic games, and beginning in August, there will be no more logic games section, and instead there will be a second scored logical reasoning section. Now, LSAC, again, feels comfortable making this change because all of their data shows that those taking the LSAT in the current format will in aggregate have comparable scores to those taking the LSAT in the new upcoming format with 2 logical reasonings and 1 reading comp. Now, that data is based on the logical reasoning sections as they have existed for pretty much forever, or at least the past 30 plus years since prep test number 1 was administered in June 1991. That contains your classic mix of logical reasoning question types, most notably inference, aka must be true and most strongly supported, necessary assumption, flaw, strengthen, weaken, and so on. There is no new bizarre type of logical reasoning question that we can expect that they will add in to the exam, and there is no reason for them to add in significantly more formal logic since their data already shows that the current logical reasoning section is a reliable one they can use to give students LSAT scores out of 180 for law school admission purposes. So despite these reports you're hearing, the logical reasoning section has not changed, and we will not expect it to change in either February or April or June or August and beyond. So the LSAT prep tests that you see all the way from prep test number 1 to prep test number 94 are still perfectly relevant. The only thing that will change and become irrelevant will be the logic games section, of course, after the June LSAT this year. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to see it. I don't do any advertising for this channel. I rely only on word of mouth to help get the word out, and your sharing this video really does make a difference. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.